Welcome back to Elasma Week. I'm Dr. David Schiffman, your host for the week. Elasma Week is an online outreach event about the science of elasmobranchs, which are sharks, skates, and rays, and the scientists who study them. This week is all about diversity, and the goal is to highlight the diversity of scientists, the many ways of doing elasmobranch research, and to show off as many weird and wonderful species as possible every year. Elasma Week wants to make a platform where real scientists can share their love and work with the public. Tonight, we have a talk from the Irish Basking Shark Group, which is a network of educators, researchers, and science communicators whose aim is twofold: to educate the public about the unique marine life that occupies Irish waters, and second, to conduct research that will encourage the protection of one such species, the basking shark. The group began locally in Ireland in 2009, but has since grown internationally with researchers and community leaders not only from Ireland, but also throughout the United Kingdom, the United States, and Canada. In this presentation, they'll offer a glimpse of life into the basking shark, share the circumstances that have led to its current status as endangered, and discuss ongoing research, education, and citizen science efforts that will hopefully lead to basking shark protections in Ireland. Those featured in the presentation represent only a small portion of the team. The work would not be possible without the cooperation, advisement, and assistance of many others. While the Irish Basking Shark Network is a diverse network of people, they have one thing in common: a passion for discovering more about one of Ireland's sea monsters. To learn more about the Irish Basking Shark Group, the basking shark itself, or its unique place in Irish history, please visit their website or follow them on social media. And representatives will be present on Sunday's live Q&A. Thank you. Take it away.
An Leavón Grania, Cetterhinus maximus, sunfish. These are all names in Ireland for the second largest fish in the sea, commonly referred to as the basking shark. The Irish Basking Shark Group began in 2009 as a small research project driven by the enthusiasm and curiosity of a few volunteers, local scientists, former fishermen and nature lovers, all who marvelled at the annual migration, movement and behaviours of these charismatic animals. The Irish Basking Shark Group continues to be a close-knit collection of locally interested nature lovers and community leaders, but it has grown over the past 10 years to include a diverse crew of international researchers, citizen scientists, educators and conservationists in Ireland, the UK, the United States and Canada so far.
Basking sharks are incredible and charismatic animals. One of their colloquial names is big mouth shark, which refers to their huge open mouth when feeding. Yet while they have a big mouth, their prey includes mainly plankton, small baby fish, and fish eggs. Like most elasmobranchs, basking sharks have 5 gills, which are used for breathing and feeding. Basking sharks are only one of 3 filter-feeding sharks in addition to the megamouth and the whale shark. Basking sharks swim with an open mouth to collect plankton. After closing its mouth, the shark uses its gill rakers, which are found along its gill slits, that filter the nourishment from the water. Their gill rakers are dark and bristle-like and act like a sieve. What a lot of people don't know is that while they filter feed, basking sharks do have hundreds of tiny teeth that are of little known biological use. There have been suggestions that the teeth have been used in mating and potentially used in oophagy, which is an interuterine cannibalism. Basking shark diet affects many aspects of their life, from physiology to ecology to their sensory systems. For example, like other sharks, they have an electrosensory system comprised of a series of electroreceptors known as ampullae of Lorenzini. Basking shark have ampullae of Lorenzini distributed over the lateral and dorsal surface of their head. The major role of the ampullae of Lorenzini is thought to be for detection of prey. Researchers believe that the position of the pores on basking sharks is thought to allow sharks to identify changes in the vertical and horizontal abundance of zooplankton. Similarly, basking shark brains are very small. They're approximately 10 centimeters long. The reason for this is thought to be an evolutionary adaptation to feeding. Their diet provides limited energy, and consequently they may not need that much energy directed to their brains, as they aren't active hunters and don't need to outsmart their prey. Their nerval mass for smell is actually much larger than the brain, suggesting that smell is important for basking shark feeding behaviour. Though it's clearly important, it's hard to believe that basking sharks get almost all their energy through the consumption of tiny zooplankton. They feed on plankton throughout their lifespan, which is estimated to be about 50 years. Even on that diet, they can grow from 10 to 14 meters long from snout to tail. To put that into perspective, it's about the size of a large school bus. Males and females differ in size, with males being about 9 meters and adults being about 10 to 14 meters. They're quite easily distinguished by the males having claspers, which is the male reproductive organ and used in mating. Very little is known about basking sharks' reproduction, including how many pups they have and how long gestation is. However, it is thought that gestation is a minimum of 1 year and potentially 2 to 3 years. Only one pregnant female has been documented, and that was reported to give birth to 5 pups and 1 stillborn pup, with the approximate size at birth believed to be between 1.5 and 1.8 meters. As you can tell, there's clearly many mysteries that remain about basking sharks. This is actually particularly interesting because the animals have interacted with people for centuries, especially in Ireland.
That's right. Over the years, this gentle giant has been a source of wonder and fascination for many. The earliest records of basking shark fossils can be dated back 35 million years, while in modern history, depictions of what are likely to be basking sharks can be found in medieval manuscripts. And in the 1800s, washed up, decomposing carcasses which took on dinosaur-like appearances led people who found them to believe they were mystical sea serpents. Even fishermen returning to port reported seeing sea monsters on their voyages, which in actuality were most likely to be basking sharks. But here in Ireland, they also have a far more tragic history. Like all sharks, their livers are very large and full of fatty oil, helping them stay buoyant. It is this oil which was used to light the houses and streets of towns and cities such as Belfast, which made them a target for fisheries that date back to the 1700s and which actually did not end until all too recently. Along with Norway, Ireland was home to one of the biggest basking shark fisheries in the world. This fishery provided important employment to local fishers in difficult times. In the earlier days, when the basking sharks arrived on the west coast in April, fishers went out on their boats called cura to harpoon them. It would take 5 to 6 men to kill one shark, and the fight could last many hours. Later, realizing that basking sharks often became entangled in salmon nets, fishers started using nets instead of harpoons to catch them. In places such as Achill Island, spotters would position themselves on the cliff while a netting crew in a cura waited for the signal. The net was fixed at one end of the shore. Then, when the shark was spotted, the cura was rowed out to it with the net in tow. The shark became entangled and its fate sealed. By the 1900s, with the introduction of mineral oils, demand for shark liver oil declined, which, alongside the decline in the number of sharks returning to Ireland every year, caused the fishery to collapse and be abandoned. The last of over 13,000 sharks in Ireland was caught in 1984, bringing to its conclusion over a century of fishing. Unfortunately, the effects of this and other fisheries seem to have had a lasting impact, and the number of basking sharks have barely recovered. Consequently, as of 2019, these wondrous sharks are considered globally endangered. This is where the Irish Basking Shark Group comes in.
Education and outreach are very important to the Irish Basking Shark Group. We have been privileged to work with young people in the Inishowen Peninsula to develop projects that promote the importance of our coastline. We have focused on developing skills and knowledge using citizen science as a way of exploring our ocean resource. Giving young people An opportunity to practice science at sea has fostered a deeper connection and understanding of the importance of protecting nature. The basking shark is an enigmatic symbol for the wider marine environment. Connecting real marine research with local communities has been key in building our efforts in getting more protection for these beautiful animals. We are continuing to work with local communities to educate and inspire a new generation to protect and value our ocean.
In spite of their prominence in the shark research community, basking sharks and their protection in Irish waters remain a relatively little-known topic. As a researcher with the group, I surveyed people in the town of Buncrana in summer 2018 to find out what the level of knowledge was about basking sharks. There was a significant positive link between the belief that basking sharks could be a profitable tourist attraction and an individual's support for legal protections for basking sharks. Conservation outreach often focuses on what we call the knowledge deficit model, which assumes that people will want to conserve something once they know more about it. That doesn't seem to be the case with basking sharks. The people I surveyed didn't really know much about them, but they were still overwhelmingly interested in protecting them, viewing them, and even paying to do so. Not to mention that basking sharks can easily be seen for free from the land, as many hikers demonstrated during lockdown. One of the goals of my research was to identify those who are opposed to shark conservation. This would help us know who we can target for outreach campaigns. However, it seems that the majority of the people I surveyed were supportive of conservation, perhaps viewing basking sharks as something unique and fascinating that can and should attract people to Ireland. A potential explanation for this could be the community outreach that the Irish Basking Shark Group has been doing for years. For example, in 2009, the community was involved with the Shark Tracker project, where local school children adopted tagged basking sharks, giving them names and learning about where they went. This was a great way to engage the children in marine conservation following their favorite sharks, and it kept the lessons exciting. During the project, one of the named sharks even traveled as far as Morocco.
Education and outreach extend to the research that we do. Our team has a lot of community science initiatives that will not only contribute to our scientific understanding of the basking shark, but also potentially produce real conservation-based results. So among these, we are working with local organizations like the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group to compile a data set of basking shark sightings around Ireland. When they forage for food at the surface, basking sharks are pretty easy to see. Their dorsal fin is often out of the water, and so people can sight them even from shore. And one of the things we're interested in determining is what is bringing the basking shark to Irish waters. Is it prey availability, water temperature, or maybe the opportunity to mate? So this will be important in understanding why Ireland might be a global basking shark hotspot. Sightings data collected from the public and ourselves can be combined with environmental data in a model to begin to understand first why sharks arrive in Ireland and whether they will continue to do so in the future if their environment is changing. So obviously we know that basking sharks come to Ireland as well as other parts of the Northeast Atlantic, which includes Scotland and England. However, from global sightings records, we do know that the basking shark is a global ocean citizen. It can be found in the Mediterranean, in New Zealand, along the coasts of Brazil and Northern Africa, and it's also been sighted here where I am based in California. As a good example of this, researchers in our group actually tagged a shark along the northern coast of Ireland that was then sighted again almost 1,000 days later along the eastern coast of the United States. So this is a really good example of how sightings data can be used to expand our knowledge about how much these animals are actually moving throughout the world's oceans. And of course, while it's important to know why the sharks are in Ireland, what they're doing here, it's also really important to understand that the sharks often swim through international waters where they may encounter different policies for their protection. And so since they are an endangered species, some sort of meaningful conservation measure will require international coordination to recover the global population. Each one of our researchers brings a unique skill set to the table. For example, while I am involved in analyzing the sightings data, I'm also really interested in trying to understand the basking shark from a more behavioral perspective. When they're in these hotspot locations, they're often observed feeding. And this is the most commonly recorded behavior, likely because it's the easiest to observe, right? The shark is at the surface and it is often swimming very slowly. In addition, the sharks are often interacting in some way when they're in these hotspot locations. They might swim next to each other in what we call parallel swimming behavior. They might swim in a coordinated group where they're all circling each other. They might follow each other in what we call nose to tail following behavior. And so clearly, while Ireland is an important area for these sharks to be feeding, there's more to the story, and trying to understand what's bringing sharks to these areas is going to really rely on seeing what they're doing when they're in these locations. And to do that, we use a variety of different technologies, from animal Fitbits, known as accelerometers, which measure the animal's body movement, to things like this. So these are animal-borne cameras, and they basically give us a good idea of what the shark is seeing when it's below the surface. So this is attached to the dorsal fin, and it really allows us to observe the unobservable. So often, again, what we know about the basking shark comes from our knowledge and our ability to observe them at the surface. But there's a lot going on underneath the surface that we need to know more about. And what's really cool about this technology too is it's not only useful at a really fine scale. We often use very similar technologies to see what populations are doing as well, and to see what larger scale movement patterns these sharks are undertaking.
Basking sharks are famous for their seasonal visits to Irish and UK waters, and they typically arrive in large numbers in both the spring and early autumn. But aside from this, they appear to disappear from our seas, and it's surprisingly challenging to follow even such a large animal. So how do you find out where these creatures go when you're not around to see them? One answer used across the field of ecology is using visual identity tags. Now, visual identity tags enable us to individually identify animals and then re-site them and create sightings maps looking at movements across hotspots. These have been used by researchers at the Irish Basking Shark Group since 2008 in collaboration with the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group, and has enabled us to piece together ideas about basking shark movements and use of hotspots. New technology in the form of satellite tags has enabled researchers to gather even more detailed information on shark movements. Now, satellite tags enable us to record not only shark location round the clock, but also other environmental variables, including depth and water temperature. Now, satellite tags have been deployed by researchers at the Irish Basking Shark Group since 2009, and once these are deployed, they then remain on the shark for approximately 9 months. After this period, the tags automatically deploy from the shark, they float to the surface and then relay their data via satellite back to researchers in the lab. And then if we're able to recover the tag itself, if it washes ashore on a beach, we can reclaim even more detailed data on shark movements to be able to piece together potential migratory corridors, look at hotspots, and assess their movement ecology. So recently, data collected by the Irish Basking Shark Group tagging programs was used to build a case for a broader basking shark tagging program through the Sea Monitor project. The Sea Monitor project is an EU-funded program that is managed by SEUPB and aims to use innovative tracking technology to assess vulnerable marine species across Ireland, Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. The team based at Queen's University Belfast will be managing the Basking Shark tagging program, and they are also members of the Irish Basking Shark Group, meaning that our researchers can work together to be able to share data, pool resources and better understand this endangered species. As part of Sea Monitor, we'll be deploying the latest satellite tag technology, recording detailed location and background environmental data from basking sharks for up to 12 months. This aims to assess shark movements and connectivity between certain key sites. The team will also be deploying new acoustic tags that offer insights into shark movements at hotspots for up to 10 years, pinging a signal to moored receivers as they pass. This will tell us how long a shark remains at each hotspot and if the same individuals are returning year after year. Taken together, these basking shark tagging datasets will enable our researchers to assess detailed long-term data to assess basking shark movement ecology, and this will then be used to write white paper recommendations to guide active conservation management to protect these endangered species for future.
Basking sharks often aggregate in large groups off the Irish coast in the summer, but we wanted to know what happens to them when they disperse from those coastal hotspots at the end of the summer. To do this, we attached satellite transmitters that would relay information about the shark's location, its temperature that it was experiencing, as well as its depth. Using the satellite transmitters that are attached to the shark's dorsal fin, we're able to get an estimate of the location for where the sharks are during the study. Here's an example of two of those sharks that actually never left coastal waters and stayed around Ireland for the entire duration of the study. In contrast, here's an example of two other sharks that left Irish coastal waters almost immediately and moved down into warmer, and in some cases tropical waters off the coast of Africa. This really demonstrates how far these sharks are capable of moving across the ocean. Now you may think that those sharks that moved south were probably moving into warmer waters. What we can see from their dive profiles shown here is that the offshore sharks actually are foraging between 300 and 600 meters, where temperatures are much cooler than what sharks would experience at the surface, like the sharks that remained in coastal waters for the duration of the study. Even though we think of these sharks as being classic surface foragers, it's quite clear that when they move into offshore waters, the story becomes much more interesting. So two really interesting questions come up. One, what are they doing down there in those 300-600 meter depth ranges? For example, are they foraging exclusively? And what are they actually feeding on? The second is, when they're at these depths, the water temperatures are much cooler than at the surface. How are they surviving and thriving in those cooler temperatures? Some of the data we have collected shows that sharks move back up to the surface in the late afternoon. Are they potentially doing that to re-warm at the surface before going back down and feeding at those cooler depths? Hopefully, the ambitious tagging that's being done as part of the Sea Monitor project will help clear some of those questions up. Understandably, most of our conservation efforts are actually based around coastal areas where they aggregate. Here, we're starting to see that their behaviors change a lot when they're offshore. Given that this species is endangered globally, understanding what is happening during those offshore movements, as well as what type of threats they may face during that phase of their movement, might help us to develop more rigorous management plans to help the species recover.
So we were working on their foraging behavior, and it was only when we were working our way through hours and hours and hours of footage that we suddenly realized that we stumbled across something from kind of folklore, from myth. We knew they breach, but recording it or setting out to record it is, like setting out to go looking for a unicorn horn. You've got the animal cruising along roundabout, very, very, very low speeds, and then suddenly you can see it just cranks it up until it just leaves the surface of the water over 5 meters a second, which, that's unexpected. It's changed our perception of the way these guys operate from that kind of docile cruising animal. The fact that we recorded an animal pulling such extraordinarily fast speeds, up to 5 meters a second, the fact that those speeds are akin to, their great white shark cousins, made us realize that we probably had a bit of a one-dimensional view on these animals. And the fact that we often think of them as, and we did historically, as sort of a cold-blooded shark in kind of cold waters, hence the sluggish kind of reputation. But that thing, when it needs it, has kind of got a Ferrari engine. And thinking about like the evolutionary consequences of why over years they've kept hold of that huge engine, what kind of benefits it might bring to their life history. That's just, it's brought more questions than answers, but they're cool questions. In terms of the data itself. So it wasn't just the camera that we had mounted, it was a full rounded, multi-channel data logger recording a whole bunch of different things, including devices called accelerometers, which are kind of like pedometers or Fitbits, with a whole host of other different sensors in there. Some of the key things that we found. So this is what it looks like if you look at the top panel there, panel A. You can see the shark at 0 meters, swims down over a couple of minutes, down to about 30 meters, just cruises it along, which is what you see at the start of the footage. And then it really kicks. It's not like a kind of labored decision to breach. When it decides to breach, it goes for it. And in that short period of time, that's about 9 seconds, it covers 28 meters. In about 10 tail beats. It's absolutely extraordinary to hit those kind of absolute velocities in such a short period of time. If you move down there, you can see that TBF just means tail beat frequency. So a full tail beat, that's a full left to right kind of movement. Think about how big these tails are. They're enormous. They're the size of a full-grown human. Putting that through the water at over 1 hertz, that means like in under 1 second, it can go fully from left to fully to right and whack the tail right across. All of the kind of reasons why people think they might breach are all still on the table. The question is, it's such a rarely recorded event that you've got to, as a scientist, you can't just say, I think it's this, thus it becomes fact. You need empirical evidence. So numbers of things on the table. Shedding parasites is one, which is always put in there. They can have large sea lampreys constantly attached to them. It could be some form of social interaction. They're not exactly a vocal species. Maybe it can attract the attention of others. It could be some display of virility, could be social, could be a good laugh. All of the above are possible. But yeah, we've got to keep looking at that to really get to grips with it.
As much as we love seeing these basking sharks at the surface, we only get to see a snapshot of what they allow us to see. Now, this is where technologies such as satellite tracking comes into play. In particular, smart position or temperature transmitting tags, or spot tags for short. Now, these spot tags allow us to know where the sharks are when they're at the surface, as the antenna on the tag effectively talks to overhead satellites whizzing around space. Now, these tags are able to tell us where the shark is down to an accuracy of 250 meters. So these data are really great when we want to look at hotspot activity, especially around the coastlines. And this is what I did for my Masters at the University of Exeter in conjunction with Manx Basking Shark Watch. Now, we revealed that basking sharks are true global citizens, and they move through the waters of Ireland, Scotland, Spain, France, Portugal and the Faroe Islands, and for the first time using satellite data we were able to track them to Moroccan and Norwegian waters. And also we were able to show that basking sharks came back to the same area the next year. So we had 4 sharks that came back to the Irish Sea and Isle of Man waters, and 1 shark that came back to Moroccan waters. Now, these insights are important because they reveal that certain areas might be suitable habitats for essential survival behaviours such as feeding, mating and pupping. Now, there are many threats that basking sharks face when they make these regional and international movements. They face threats from vessel strike and from accidental capture in fisheries, and from newly emerging threats such as plastics, underwater cabling and noise pollution. Now, there are ways in which we can aid in the protection of basking sharks, and one of those is to designate marine protection zones. So I did this using the satellite data and also from public sightings data. Now, what this analysis does is it effectively takes each location data point and it spreads it out so it interacts with other location data points, and this produces a density index or hotspot index. And from this we were able to identify west coast and southern hotspots for basking sharks around the Isle of Man. Now, adding to the knowledge base of any species is essential when we're looking at these conservation measures such as protection zones, or even other measures such as seasonal speed restrictions. Now, it's this knowledge base that I'm hoping to add to as part of my Irish Research Council funded PhD at Trinity College Dublin with Dr. Nicholas Payne.
As of 2019, the basking shark was considered globally endangered, and yet there remains no protection for it in Irish waters. As a group, we hope to collect data to justify its protection in what is clearly such a critical part of its range. To do that and encourage protective measures, we really need everyone from researchers to community scientists to get involved. Our aim is to educate the public on the wonderfully diverse and abundant marine wildlife occupying Irish waters. In particular, we centre our research and education efforts on the basking shark and strive to ensure its protection in policy and law for the future. The Irish Basking Shark Group are privileged to work on these incredible and charismatic animals. At the same time, we have a responsibility to apply our efforts to their protection and continued survival. A healthy and thriving environment where human activities do not impinge on the natural behaviour of these ancient fish is our goal. Once at the frontier of known civilization, we want Ireland and Irish waters to be a safe haven and refuge for basking sharks, where the glimpse of a dark fin on the water is a common sight for enthusiastic coastal communities and groups such as ourselves for generations to come.